Today we've got a crazy revenge story about someone who wants to ruin their boss's whole career. We'll get into that in a bit, but first, how I humbled my professor. My wife and I recently hosted a small party with family and friends for my 40th birthday, and lots of past events were brought up, many of which were laughed about, but I was particularly reminded of my experience being a teacher assistant for a professor in my department. This was back in 2014. I had just begun my PhD, and with all my prior education being funded by my parents, I had gotten so comfortable with the arrangement it came as a surprise to me when my parents said they were done paying for my tuition and I was old enough to figure things out on my own. I was a newly married 30-year-old man without a stable source of income, which is why when I was informed by another teaching assistant about working under one of our lecturers, without hesitation I told him I was interested. I never bothered to ask why he chose to switch professors to work under, but I did ask why he was being so kind. He said I looked like I needed it. I should have known nothing comes for free. Known for its works and publications, Professor Evan was one of those lecturers you instantly liked as soon as you entered his class. He had a way of not just speaking, but teaching that let you know he was good at his job. He also had the experience to back it up. He was what they called an all-rounder, and I was assigned to work under him. It felt like such a privilege not just to find a reliable source of income, but also opportune to be working for a prestigious professional in the field of organic chemistry. I was determined to do my very best and show all my effort. Professor Evan was a busy man. I naturally assumed because of how good he was in his field, it seemed like he was always needed at a summit or seminar or classes. But as time went by, it became clear to me that it wasn't any of his summit or seminar that kept him busy, but his refusal to delegate. To put it more simply, he never wanted any of his assistants taking big steps. He would rather limit them into mediocrity. My first proper chat with Professor Evan happened about a month and a half after I started working for him. This was one of those days when we were busy grading scripts, as his only teaching assistant there was a lot on my plate. Out of the blue, he starts to ask personal questions, which was unlike him, but I answered them nonetheless. One thing led to another, and he invited me for dinner at his home so I could get to know his family. He also said I was free to bring my wife along. The day of the dinner arrived, and I made it to his house without my wife, who had traveled for a case as a junior lawyer. When he said dinner, I expected just him, his wife, and children if he had any, but it was more than that. This was a party thrown to celebrate one of his research publications that had been awarded. Everything was going on smoothly till the professor came to meet me and asked for my help serving some of his guest wine. That sounded like the job of the waiters, but then I looked around and saw that there were no waiters. I must have had a look on my face because suddenly he laughed and patted me on my right shoulder, saying he forgot to make arrangements with the waiters and he would not ask if it wasn't important. It felt insulting in a way, but I couldn't say no to the man I worked under. Besides, it was just for one night, right? I became the waiter for the night, filling people's glass with wine while being introduced as his new assistant. I felt embarrassed, but I shook it off with a smile. The week after the party, we were back to our routine, me doing nothing but grading scripts and some manuals and articles needed for the next ongoing research the professor was working on while undergoing my research. To be honest, it gave me time to focus more on my work, but it felt like I wasn't doing much as a teaching assistant. I should be offered a chance to teach students once in a while, or at least my capability be tested as other PhD students like mine were doing. The plan for me was to move up the ladder from being a teacher assistant to become an assistant lecturer, and if I didn't start to make my mark, that wasn't going to happen anytime soon. I spoke to the professor about it and he said I was being too greedy and some crap about how life was a journey and I had to start small before becoming big. I believed all his pep talk and loosened up, which gave the professor the chance to slowly start introducing more personal work and less academic work. I became his valet and his personal delivery man. I was responsible for parking the car properly because my boss was late and needed to get to class early. Sometimes I had to wait for a car to leave the parking lot because they were filled, and also was responsible for taking his clothes to the laundromat and sending flowers to his daughter that just graduated from college because he was too busy to come. Honestly, I didn't even realize just how bad it had gotten until my wife called me out on it. Whenever she called, I was always busy running an errand for the professor, and she had to voice out that it was becoming a lot more than normal. I decided to take a step back with the chores. I thought being a kiss-ass was going to get me somewhere, but it got me nowhere with this man. Things started to get even weirder than normal after the professor stumbled upon my research topic. Before this, I had never spoken to him about my project or what it entailed, and I wanted to keep it that way because I had come to notice the professor had a fear of being surpassed. He liked the idea of being called the best in the field, and upon further discussion with some other assistants, they all said the same thing. That there hasn't been a person who worked under that didn't switch professors, but to switch professors, he had a condition: to find another suitable PhD student who would take over, and I happened to be the unlucky fellow who fell for the trap. After 6 months of working for this man, I was still doing the same things I did in my first month. There was no room for learning, but at least I had my research to work on, and the advantage of working with the professor was the access to his lab. He had his lab just before entering his office. I could conduct simulations that took days and hours with his computer. Basically, I had my work cut out for me. I cannot particularly think of the time it started, but slowly this man became so interested in my work. The thing was, he had his research he was working on, and there were days we worked together in the lab. I was working on compounds that best reduced metal corrosion, while the professor was working on chemicals and their reactions to particular compounds. I wouldn't bore you with all the details, but it seemed like the professor's work wasn't going too well. There were a lot of miscalculations. The professor would often complain about how he felt like I was taking my work more seriously than his. I mean, it was his research. Was I not supposed to take my research more important than his? But to maintain peace, I had to stop with my research and we joined hands to work together, running so many overnights together, yet the result wasn't forthcoming. I've never seen the professor more disoriented. If there was nothing to work on, we could always find something new, but he was not having it. He said none of his research had even been a failure. He made sure he took on the best projects available, so basically, I was stuck working on a failed project. One random morning, I came over to see my professor looking pleased. He said there was no need to keep working on the research as he had found something more interesting to work on. I was pleased to hear this. When I asked what we would be working on, he said he couldn't trust me enough to work on this project with him because I did not do enough for his last project. I was insulted and I realized one thing. Nothing I ever did was going to matter, so I decided to F it. Whenever the professor came late, instead of waiting in his office, I went ahead and filled in for him, especially early morning classes. The first time I did this, he yelled at me and I realized that was the worst he could do. He couldn't fire me because then he would be left without an assistant, so I did it over and over again, and soon the professor stopped being late. But the students had gotten to know me and they realized I could teach them. Those who had problems in class and were stuck with their projects came to me for help. I tutored them privately and was making money from this. A lot was becoming clear to me. I had been limiting myself because I didn't want to get on the bad side of the professor. But this man had made a name for himself and I was still a newbie. I couldn't work as a shadow forever. As I continued tutoring students, more students referred their mates to me, basically telling their mates I was good. I guess word got out because the inevitable happened. It was a usual day. I was working on my research in the lab when the professor came out of nowhere, furiously yanked me to the side. He said he'd been working for the institution for about 20 years now, so he was damn good at his job, so he was not going to let a newbie weakling like me destroy his years of hard work by scouting all the students and diverting their attention away from him. I told him most of his students needed help with their projects and sought out my assistance because he was too busy and there was no stealing or scouting of students going on. But then he told me to shut it down. Otherwise, he was going to make sure he destroys any chance I had of having a career. I wouldn't lie. I was scared, but then the fear wore off and anger began setting in. If I was going to go down, I might as well drag the professor with me. I decided it was time to start getting evidence against the professor, so I made sure to defy him. I had no idea this man had stolen my research topic as his own till he publicly announced to the other lecturers in the department he was working on a new research work after the old failed, and in front of me, he called out my research topic as all the other lecturers praised him for thinking fast. This was when I lost it. I knew I would not be believed if I told everyone my topic that I had been working on for several months was stolen by the professor because most of my research work I did at his place without thinking it would come to this. This man was out to ruin my life. First, he threatens me to stop tutoring students on their projects, and now he was stealing my research. I was back to square one, but I wanted to make sure we were even. I confronted him after the meeting about stealing my work with hopes of recording him admitting to my allegations, but he denied it all. All he said was he had no idea what I was talking about and he had never seen my research topic. If coincidentally it happened to be the same as mine, then I was more than welcome to join him, so I could learn a thing or two from him. I was so furious, I knew I had to do something. As soon as I left his office, I overheard some of the lecturers talking about the program that he had the next week. I thought to myself, what better place to question my professor than in front of students and lecturers he would be explaining his research plans to try and get the institution to fund it. No matter how smart Professor Evan might be, he wasn't smart enough to download months of research work into his head in a week. I got to the conference room as early as possible. Prior to this, I had invited a couple of colleagues who had their own terrible experience with the professor, and as soon as it was time for the professor to present his research plans, I got to work. I made sure he explained his plan on how to achieve a SMART objective in his research before asking a crucial information he forgot to add in. He tried to maneuver his way into answering, but then I asked the second and third simultaneously. By now, people were focused on me. He tried to make it seem like I was being impatient with my question and began using extensive words that made no meaning, but I wasn't done. After getting the permission of the institution board, I brought out my drive and showed everyone the project I had been working on and how it all seemed to tally with that of my boss. This became a big morale for others who had similar experiences with Professor Evans, as they all began to share each of their experiences working under him. How he was a bully with zero respect for his assistant, how he belittled us when the opportunity presented itself, and how he always tried to limit all his assistants' potential. The professor was stunned. I'm guessing he was not expecting people to call him out on his terrible behavior. He had been so used to scaring people into saying nothing, he never knew a day of retaliation could come. He tried to defend himself, but the institution board wasn't having it. They agreed to take up his matter, and by the next month, he was out of a job. I eventually got accepted as an assistant lecturer after proving my worth to the next professor I was lucky to work under, and I've worked my way up into being a senior lecturer with about 10 publications under my name. I sometimes wonder where I would be if I didn't voice out about Professor Evan. Our next story is, decline to pay me after I help you pass your exam? Have fun getting deported. So this happened a couple years ago during COVID when everything was online. A mutual friend, let's call him D, reached out to me, absolutely desperate. He was on the verge of getting deported because he had already failed his coding exam twice. One more failure and he wouldn't be able to stay in the country. He knew I was good at coding and begged me to take the exam for him. He told me how his entire future depended on it, how he had no options left, etc. Feeling a bit sorry for him, I agreed, on a condition that he would pay me $500 for doing it. He agreed immediately, so I spent a couple of weeks preparing. The exam was proctored over Zoom, and we set it up so that I could control his computer remotely while he pretended to take the exam himself. We pulled it off without a hitch, and he passed the exam. Afterward, we went out for drinks to celebrate. Each paid their own share because I didn't want him deducting anything from what he owed me. Here's where things went downhill. He gave me $100 up front and promised to pay the remaining $400 in a couple weeks after he sorted out his graduation stuff. Weeks turned into months, and he kept daunting me with excuses. After 6 months of this, it became clear he wasn't going to pay me back. I gave him multiple warnings to pay me or I'll report him, but he kept taking it lightly and blocked me. I was tipped. I helped him out, and he completely ghosted me after getting what he wanted, so I decided to take matters into my own hands. First, I reported him to his university for academic misconduct. I explained in detail how I was the one who took the exam for him and provided evidence to back it up. They investigated and failed him retroactively, which meant he couldn't graduate. Since his visa was tied to his student status, this basically screwed him over completely. Some context: it was an anonymous tip off to the college with a fake email with all the proof. They called him and gave him a chance to retake the exam on the spot, but Guy never studied and failed at the most basic stuff. But it didn't end there. He was still living in the country illegally, hoping to somehow fix things. I knew he had no way out, so I anonymously tipped off the authorities, saying there is an illegal immigrant involved in suspicious activity living in my area. They came, found out he was there illegally, and he got deported. Context: as for the deport, I felt a bit scared in case he tried to hurt me in some way, so I made sure he never set a foot in there again. Now, some mutual friends are saying I went too far, that it was a petty move to ruin his entire life over $400. On one hand, I feel like he deserved it for trying to scam me. I wouldn't have minded if he came clean saying he doesn't have the money or financial capacity to pay him, he was sorry. I would have let the matters go without a hitch. Our next story is, I hunted down my credit card thieves. Yesterday morning, I received an email notification from my credit card company stating a transaction for $1,500 and a med spa was declined, and another stating it was approved. I immediately called said credit card company to report the fraudulent charge. Turns out, my card has had fraudulent charges over the past 3 weeks with purchases including various hotels in my area, eBay, gas station, self-storage, and moving truck rental. I rarely use this card. The last time I used it in person was in February, and last online purchase in 2023. Fortunately, my credit card company flagged all recent charges and closed my card. This morning, my significant other had a doctor's appointment in the same city as a hotel purchase made yesterday. After the doctor, boyfriend asked me what I thought we should do today. I said, well, you wanted to shop for some new shoes, or we can swing by this hotel up the street and see if the credit card thieves are still there. The amount seemed like it would cover 2 or 3 days. So boyfriend and I'd go to the hotel to see if the people were still checked in and to let them know the card was stolen and the charges would be reversed. Front desk lady was ticked. She was able to find the reservation by card number and noted that the person had kept changing cards to pay for the room. Of course, they didn't tell me the room number. Much to my boyfriend's dismay, boyfriend was hoping to get a room key to take their stuff. Yeah, right. I called the credit card company and they asked me to call the police. I called the sheriff department and they arrived within 20 minutes. I was surprised they even came. I gave them my report, ID, and credit card. The deputy asked if I wanted to prosecute. I said yes! But can I prosecute if my credit card company is going to refund all the money anyway? Then they went inside and spoke to the front desk who provided them the invoice. Boyfriend and I waited outside in front of the lobby. Then, through the automatic sliding doors, I hear the front desk lady yell, "That's him! He's trying to leave!" Like Hispanic dude with a bull terrier and several bags gets placed in cuffs. He gets brought outside, searched, and doggo gets cuffed to a trash can. Then, another little Asian guy gets brought out in cuffs. A third deputy arrives and brings out a fancy Asian lady with a face full of fillers, 2 suitcases, and a Coach backpack. 4 officers start going through the backpacks on the hood of their car. We see passports, IDs, credit cards. They pull out a big credit card printing machine and a laptop. Then they pull out a big Ziploc filled with crystal meth and the cop exclaims, "Here we go," and turns towards us to flash a smile. 2 of them go back to search the hotel room and bring down 2 bags with more drugs, a scale, 4 car keys, and a big wad of cash. Unfortunately, none of the cars were in the parking lot, and the perps said they had been traveling by Uber. The cops contacted one of the thief's friends to pick up the dog, who arrived pretty quickly. It was an older Asian dude with tattoos, flashy jewelry, and an old luxury SUV. Millery, we got his pics and license plates. All these guys seemed like characters out of The Brother's Son. The deputies then gave me all the paperwork and told me that one of the guys said they stole my card off the internet. I would have guessed that they used a scanner while I was at the fair a few weeks ago. I find that so weird because I haven't used my card online in almost a year. Apparently, they made a physical card that had a different name on it. Anywho, I walked inside to give the front desk a copy of the incident number, and then I remembered something else. I remember seeing another transaction for a storage unit that was made yesterday and 2 charges at a rental truck company. I go back outside and talk to the sheriff and asked him if he wanted me to try to figure out where that was. I was able to track down the storage location to a city about 15 minutes away, but no can do on the trucks. I called the storage place and they confirmed that a payment was made with my card, but would not give me the unit number. From there, the sheriff said that it was out of their jurisdiction and they would try to get a search warrant, but that might take a while. However, it might be helpful if I made a police report with the other city. So, with nothing better to do, I drove my butt over there and made another police report regarding the storage unit. That's it for now. We'll update if anything else happens. In the meantime, I'll call up the credit bureau to freeze my social security, tell my dog to be on alert, and load magazines. Any other suggestions? Also, Copper asked if I wanted to prosecute, but that was before the drug test. So do I need a lawyer? Thanks in advance. Mini update. Got a notification in the mail of the court date this week. Kinda bummed only one of the 3 are being charged. I'm hoping to attend if I can get a babysitter for my baby. Do they allow babies in courtrooms? Entropy Fighter responded, You do not need a lawyer. Your lawyer is the prosecutor. I mean, they aren't your personal attorneys, but they're prosecuting the crimes on behalf of the state. If they choose to prosecute, and they will, it's highly likely that these people will take a deal. But if it goes to trial, you'll be called as a witness. That's it. Our next story is, disrespect me? I'll ruin your whole dang career. So my old boss, beloved by all, left the company last year. While they are trying to find a replacement, upper management decided that the person in charge of another department should be our boss. For the time being, of course. This person, let's call her Dina, does not have a single iota of what anyone on this team does, nor does she want to learn what we do. Fine, whatever, just let me do my work, get my money, and leave me alone. This issue comes in when she suddenly decides that we're disrespecting her with everything we do. Not early enough to a meeting? 15 minutes is her latest earliest. Disrespect. Have to step away to use the restroom? Disrespect. Take your PTO that's offered by the company? Disrespect. Finally, I have enough and start documenting every instance with proof and witnesses into a massive Excel sheet. At this point, sure, it's annoying and I'm passively looking for new work, but I've dealt with worse. The breaking point for me came during my yearly review. This is the first and hopefully only time I've ever been put on a PIP plan. I was told repeatedly that I was lazy and disrespectful, despite several clients providing positive feedback and me working until 22 hours most nights. But I keep quiet, I toe the line until I have a new job. Then I let the floodgates open. Now, something important to note is that while our former boss was great, we weren't all going to quit in solidarity with her. But me? Well, that's a bit of a different story. In addition to my job, I also worked to make my coworkers' jobs easier too. I was kind of the glue holding that entire team together. So when I quit, everyone else on my team did as well. And what did our team do, you might ask? Well, we supplied a service that brought in the majority of the revenue. With no one to supply the service, the business would head towards bankruptcy. Back to the story. When I put in my resignation, I decided to include the spreadsheet to provide further insight as to why I was leaving. And to top it all off, I decided to BCC the CEO. He and I are pretty close, and he's told me on multiple occasions that he would do anything to keep me employed there. When he found out about Dina's antics, he held true to his word, asked if he should fire Dina. Now, Dina may be a Richard, but she has young kids and I'm not a Richard, so I told him no, but if anyone else leaves because of her, then he should rethink her employment. Well, my last day comes and goes, and the rest of the team puts in their resignations, effective immediately, citing disrespect from Dina specifically. With no team to manage, CEO decides that Dina no longer has a place at the company and decides to fire her with no severance. How do I know? Dina decided to spam call me for several days, but my new fancy job is at a law firm and I was able to get one of them to draft up a cease and desist. Haven't heard a peep since, and now I'm just enjoying my new gig, Dina free. EPBX guy responded, "Why did you let the Dina situation get so far out of hand if you were such close friends with the CEO? Surely a few words about what was going on would have protected the company and your friend, the CEO. They would also have enabled you to keep the job you were happy in pre-Dina." Wonder B replied, "Dina was also friends with the CEO and higher up on the food chain. If he had to choose between me and her, it could have gone either way, and if Dina left and I was still there, she had minions that would have made working there miserable still. So I endured until I didn't have to."